The entrance into St. Clair River from Lake Huron had long been deemed of strategic importance, and that's the reason that Fort Gratiot was located there. And with the surge in vessel traffic on Lake Huron in the early 1800s, the need for a lighthouse to guide vessels into the river and away from the shallows at the river's entrance became a matter of increasing importance. In response to this need, Congress appropriated $3,500 to construct a lighthouse near Fort Gratiot on March 3, 1823. Unfortunately, it wasn't located where the present lighthouse stands. It was located at the mouth of the river, right about here. The new tower stood only 32 feet in height, had a diameter of 18 feet at the base, and tapered to a diameter of 9.5 feet at the top. George McDougall, a former Detroit lawyer who had been disbarred, was selected as the light's first official keeper. Keep in mind back then that these were political appointments, and he still had enough clout to be able to swing it his way. And it wasn't a bad gig. He got about $350 a year. It wasn't all bad during that time. It became quickly apparent that the structure was both poorly designed and constructed. McDougall's reports indicated that the stairs were so steep that they had to be climbed sideways, and the trap door into the lantern room was barely large enough for a man to squeeze through. While McDougall no doubt reported with the truth on this situation, it also must be noted that he was reputedly a short man with a weight in excess of 300 pounds, and as such hired an assistant to perform all his tower work. The lens in this lighthouse was invented by Winslow Lewis. Lewis was the inventor of the patented Lewis lamp, which was the primary source of illumination in the nation's growing inventory of lighthouses. Lewis was a pretty smart guy. He decided, well, I can invent these and put these in the lighthouses. Why can't I contract and build these lighthouses? And so that's what he did. He actually got most of the contracts for so many of the lighthouses that were going up rapidly around the country. Of course, he had to subcontract it, and that was the major problem, I think, especially in this case. During the summer of 1828, McDougall further reported that the tower was cracking and had begun to settle in such a manner that it was leaning noticeably toward the east. Finally, reports from mariners indicated that the tower was both poorly located and illuminated, since they found that its feeble light was virtually invisible until their vessels were almost at the mouth of the river. As a result of continuing erosion at the foot of the tower caused by the swift current in the river, the footings on the tower became so severely undermined that the tower finally toppled to the ground during one of Huron's infamous November storms in 1828. Congress acted swiftly, and on April 2nd of 1829 appropriated $8,000 for the construction of a new, improved lighthouse. This is the oldest known picture of the lighthouse in its present-day location, taken in 1871. Here are two early postcards. This one is black and white, and this one here is colored. Makes a difference. This time the bid for construction was awarded to Lucius Lyons, who was the Deputy Surveyor General of the Northwest Territory at the time. He'd later go on to become one of Michigan's first U.S. Senators. Lyons' crew began work immediately and completed the reconstruction in December of that year, the same year that the appropriation was made. The new brick tower was 74 feet in height and 25 feet in diameter, and the lantern was once again outfitted with one of the universal Lewis lamp systems, which was fueled by whale oil brought in on the Erie Canal. The Lewis lamp in the lighthouse was removed in 1857, and the tower was refitted with the new Fresnel lens, which had an intensity of at least 4 times that of the old Lewis lens. These were actually French lenses, which the French have been using for almost 20 years. In 1861, the government increased the height of the tower to 82 feet, and the lens was replaced with the newer lens showing a fixed white light. It was still a Fresnel lens, but a better one. Remember this picture from our last video of the Grand Trunk shops, and also the roundhouse was there? Well, before the fire, this was a pretty busy place, and all these trains going north with their lights shining out into the lake caused a lot of confusion for the boats coming in. The bad part about it was that the lights on the locomotives were just as bright as the light on the lighthouse, if not brighter. The problem was remedied in 1867. There was a swap made with a point of arcs light in Michigan. They had a flashing light, whereas Fort Gratiot was a fixed light. And so they made the switch, and then Fort Gratiot had the flashing light, which was different than the train light, so it was easier to spot. The original keeper's house was built in 1829, but it burned to the ground after candles on a Christmas tree started a fire in 1873. Of course, real candles on a Christmas tree was quite common during that time period. In 1874, it was replaced by a brick building. Over the years, the front porch rotted and fell off, and an ingenious person came up with the idea of turning it into a duplex. The main door was closed off to the foyer, and a door was placed on each side to provide separate entrances for the building that was split down the center and converted into a duplex. The keeper lived on one side of the building, and the assistant and his family lived on the other. In 1932, a smaller brick building was built for the home of the commanding officer of the life-saving services. To the right of the large duplex home stands another smaller brick building that contains the foghorn. The White Coast Guard building was built in 1932, and the flag of the United States of America waved proudly at the front of this building. One time the lighthouse keeper asked a visitor, he says, "You know what that brass ball on top of the pole is for?" The visitor, of course, said no. He says, "Well," he shared the legend. He says, "It contains a razor blade, a match, and a bullet. The theory was to cut the flag down with a razor, burn it with a match, and then shoot yourself because you're never supposed to surrender." The lighthouse was again severely threatened during the Great Freshwater Hurricane of 1913, when it was almost washed from its foundation. After weathering this storm within the tower, Captain Frank Kimball, the keeper at the time, was quoted as saying, "I watched waves as high as 30 to 40 feet pounding on the lighthouse, and I think if the storm had lasted another hour, the lighthouse would have been wiped out." In order to help protect the foundation from such future poundings, Kimball installed a 3-foot high brick and mortar retaining wall around the side of the tower. This is the gallery deck. If you're fortunate enough and get all the way to the top, well, then you can look out and have a beautiful view. But in order to do that, you have to climb 94 winding stairs to reach the top. And when looking up at the iron staircase, it's a little intimidating, mainly because there's no outside railing. I remember when I went up there with my dad, we were both adults at the time, and neither one of us weighs near 300 pounds like the first innkeeper, but boy, I'll tell you, we were clinging to the wall all the way up. When you look down, they appear as fine lace work crafted by a designer. The wearing age beneath the steps add to the beauty of the variegated shades of light red from the wear and tear on the stairs. From the gallery to the ground, it's 66 feet, and the lighthouse stands 86 feet high from the water level to the focal point of the light. Of course, today everything is electric and everything is automated. Lighthouse keepers have it so much easier today than the original ones did. You can see from this photo here how much better this location, the current location, is than the first location. Ships can see it so much better from the lake, and they couldn't see the first one until they were actually in the river itself. 150 years ago, this is what it looked like at night, shining its beacon out to protect the ships. And I think today, it's not much different. The light might be a little brighter, but it's still serving the purpose of sending a beacon protecting the ships. Lighthouse Park was more than just a lighthouse. I mean, it was a park, it was a place to have fun. It was a beach where you could go swimming, and you can see the kids here swinging on the swings and going down the slide. But it was also a tourist camp. A tourist camp was basically the early RV parks. Of course, there was no RVs during that time, but people would pitch their tents and enjoy the water, go swimming, and have a lot of fun. Eventually, tent camping was banned in Lighthouse Park, whereas a few caused problems for the majority. Neighbors complained about the wild parties and all the noise, and so it was discontinued. I touched briefly on the life-saving service when I mentioned the building being constructed for the commander in 1932 at Lighthouse Park. But prior to that, it was further up on Lake Huron. I've always heard that it was 4 to 5 miles. I never knew for sure where exactly it was until just this week. And I found out, if you look at this Google map here, that it was near the Fort Gratiot Park, just south of Metcalf Road. This is the exact location of the life-saving station. The owners knew that there had once been a historic structure there, but were surprised to discover the whole life-saving station foundation intact when they started working on their home. The property owners were kind enough to allow 2 days for the Coast Guard to document the find. They came in and took pictures and notes. At the end of the documentation, the commander ordered their largest helicopter to fly over the site in honor of the men that had gone before them. When the owners asked why the Coast Guard had taken such care and interest, the commander replied that it was like finding a great-grandfather's grave, because actually the U.S. life-saving stations were predecessors to the Coast Guard. This is a photo of the actual life-saving station. It's surprising that today most citizens are unaware of the history and the extraordinary feats of the crews of the United States Life-Saving Service. The service during its official life of 44 years, before becoming part of the U.S. Coast Guard in 1915, is credited with going to the aid of over 178,000 people in peril on the water. Life-saving stations were located on the beaches along the Atlantic, the Gulf, on the Mississippi and the Great Lakes, and on the Pacific as far north as Alaska. The men who made up the crews of the service were known as surfmen because they launched their boats from open beaches into the surf. Surfmen could be no older than 45 and had to be physically fit and adept at handling an oar. A glance at the muster rolls of the service shows that most surfmen listed their occupations before entering the life-saving service as fisherman or mariner. The number of men composing a crew was determined by the number of oars needed to pull the largest boat at the station. This means the crews ranged from 6 to 8, but by the turn of the century, some stations were staffed with at least 10 men. This is one of the actual crews from the Lake Huron life-saving station. Notice the cannon right there in the cart. This is one of the ways that they used to rescue the people that were on the rocks or stranded close to shore. When a shipwreck close to shore and the seas were too rough for boats, then the service could use this method with a cannon. This photograph is a reenactment of that procedure. This cannon-like gun was called a Lyle gun. It could shoot about 600 yards or up to 600 yards, and what it would do is shoot it, a smaller line, actually shoot it over the wrecked ship so that they would be able to get it. And then they would pull the heavier line toward them to secure it. Once the line was secured, there was a couple of different ways that they could rescue them. In this Life-Saving Station Museum, both these ways are illustrated here. The first is the buoy chair. This is like a lifesaver with a canvas bag attached to it that you could put your legs through it. You can see the stall that's hanging from the ceiling. They would put them in that, and then they would haul them along that line back to shore. It was kind of a long process if there was very many people. The second way was by using a life car. Typically, a life car carried 4 to 6 people. Lifeguards were heavy and they were difficult to handle. But once the line was secured, a lifeguard could be pulled back and forth between the wreck and the safety of the shore. The lifeguard looked like a tiny, primitive submarine, and it could be hauled over, through, or even under the seas. After the hatch in the top of the car was sealed, there was enough air within the device to accommodate the people for 3 minutes. It's hard to envision that happening, but I guess when you're desperate, you crowd in there and hope for the 3 minutes that you're going to be on shore. The sailing ships were never considered enough to get shipwrecked right in front of the life-saving station. And that's the reason that they had these carts with wheels on them. The carts had everything that they needed. They had the cannon, they had the lines, had the buoy chair, and they would take it and they would go to wherever the wreck was. Now, if it was able to go by the surf boat, in that case they would take the surf boat, and usually they would attach a horse to it and pull that surf boat up along the beach as far as it would go, and then they put that surf boat into the surf and go out to the shipwreck. As you can see from this picture here, it didn't matter what kind of weather that there was. If the ship was sailing, the life-saving station would be doing its job. Of course, there was a lot of downtime. They weren't constantly rescuing people. Each day of the week, except Sunday, the surfmen were expected to drill or clean. On Mondays and Thursdays, for example, the crew practiced with the beach apparatus. The surfmen had to complete the entire procedure of rigging the equipment, including firing the Lyle gun at a practice pole shaped like a ship's mast. When the district inspectors arrived, the entire drill had to be completed within 5 minutes, or the man slowing the operation could be dismissed from the service. This photo shows the capsizing drill. The crew pulled the boat over, keeping clear of it as it capsized. The keeper pictured in the far left scrambled up around the stem of the boat, often not getting completely wet. Notice again the large crowds gathered around the station watching the drill. Notice in this postcard from 1906 of Port Huron that there's quite a crowd watching this life-saving drill as well. In 1889, the service became uniform. The idea grew from stations on the Great Lake, which had adopted a naval uniform. Initially, this did not result in the unity that they had envisioned, but instead resulted in shouts of outrage. The surfmen were expected to pay for the uniforms out of their meager salaries. Yes, the surfmen had to pay for their own uniforms. They got very low pay. They had no retirement. They put their lives on the line all the time. But yet this is what the U.S. Life-Saving Service is all about. In our next video, we'll look at Lakeside Park and Beach and Gratiot Beach and Huronia Beach and a couple points north. And then we'll head back to the city.